So what I want to wrap up here is a wrap up and a look ahead, kind of thinking through what we've discussed and seeing what it might lead us, where it might lead us down the road. So there's a great quote, once again, by J.R.R. Tolkien about going out your door. You don't know where you're going to get swept off to. So that's what we're thinking about. Where will this technology sweep us off to that we may or may not like, depending on where we end up? So I was part of a study a couple years ago that wrote a very widely regarded synopsis and vision statement about the future of software engineering. And in that, we focused a bit on the idea that humans and AI would work together as trustworthy collaborators. This was November 2021, which ironically was about a year before ChatGPT escaped from the lab. And so what was interesting was we thought that vision was like a 10 to 15 year vision. We didn't realize it was like a 10 to 15 month vision. So I think that probably what we've seen with generative AI up to this point is a nice down payment towards that perspective. But of course, we're not there yet. I think getting things to be trustworthy to the point where we can do artificial intelligence, getting the humans more out of the loop, that probably still is a 10 to 15 year horizon. But a lot of progress will be made, and it'll be made in generative AI years, which is kind of like dog years or cat years. One generative AI years is very heavily compressed. A lot of things change quickly. From a software perspective, a lot of what's going to happen is people will be able to program, or problem solve is probably a better term, based on what they're trying to do, not on how they express it in their favorite third and fourth generation language, which is how we've done things mostly up to this point, unless you're totally into model-driven engineering. But even then, you're still kind of programming with tools that are specified in a more formal and structured way. I think the big step forward here is going to be getting a lot of people who are not computer scientists or data scientists to learn to use computation in the form of LLMs and other tools along those lines, where they're focusing on problem solving, not coding in the traditional way. And why is that important? Historically, when we had people come to us as computer scientists from biology or chemistry or physics or classical civilization or economics, wherever they were coming from, even in engineering disciplines like biomedical engineering, and they said, we want to use computation in our work. We would say, great, we're going to teach you how to program in JavaScript. We're going to teach you how to program in C++ or whatever. And they'd be like, maybe I'll wait a little while. That was the wrong answer. What they needed to do was figure out how to do problem solving, and LLMs allow you to do problem solving as opposed to coding, but you're problem solving with natural language, which has its pros and cons, but I think it's the way things are going. Likewise, very soon, like right now, everybody who uses LLMs is a programmer. We don't always think of it that way, but when you interact with the LLM, you are programming it by interacting and prompting and so on, and that's getting the information out that you need. And there's some really nice articles that some of my colleagues like Jules and Jesse and me and others have written talking about the concept of prompt patterns. If you're a software developer or you're a software student here, computer scientist, you've probably taken the 3251 course where you learn about patterns, software patterns. Well, surprise, surprise, there are patterns for doing effective prompting, just like there's patterns for writing Java or C++ or Python. And so you might want to take a look at some of these articles. They're very popular and give you a perspective on where we're headed there. I think where we're headed, and I certainly see this in my own work, we're going to be able to allow humans to focus on things that are more creative, more architectural, focusing on the big picture, focusing on meeting the user needs, rather than being wrapped around the axle of low-level mundane details. If you ever want to really amuse yourself, take a look at the obfuscated C code contest, and there's winners for decades. It's gone on for decades. And then feed the obfuscated C code into an LLM and ask it to explain what it does. It's actually pretty funny. I think oftentimes it probably does a better job than humans figuring out what the code does. Now, another thing that I would be remiss if I didn't focus on in the context of ethics and so on, is the world really coming to an end? So if you Google, is AI the end of the world, you will discover a lot of articles, most of which have been written in the last 6 to 8 months, saying there's a damn good chance AI will destroy humanity. The end of humanity, where AI is highlighted. Should we stop developing AI for the good of humanity? Are we doomed? Is the AI apocalypse actually coming? And it reminds me of the famous scene from Ron Burgundy in, Anchorman, where he said, wow, boy, that escalated quickly. So within literally days of these things coming out, people had decided it was the end of the world. What keeps me awake at night is obviously more things that are near and dear, like the emergence of spinning black holes, which are going to suck us in to another galaxy. I think that's probably the bigger threat at the moment than AI destroying the world. Too much TikTok, right? Depression, anxiety, eating disorders, addiction. Everybody's brains are getting eaten by TikTok. More realistic things, war and conflict. That's probably more likely to be a problem at the moment. It's interesting, I was interviewed in the media recently, and they asked the question, are you worried about kids who will form friendships with their virtual pals, their AI buddies, and not develop friendships in the real world? And I was like, as a parent, that's like a very low on the list of things I worry about with my kid, right? There's a lot of other things that they're going to get in trouble with besides forming too close an identity with their virtual friend. Although I'm sure that will become a problem at some point. Now, of course, if generative AI is indeed the end of humanity, then a lot of the stuff we're worrying about here won't matter, right? There's a great quote by Kurt Vonnegut that people always like to quote, especially when they're at a fraternity party. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we may die. Now, the ironic part is Dorothy Parker came along and said, but alas, we never do. And we probably won't die from AI or the ingestion of too much AI. So if that's the case, if you believe that that's the case, then there's a lot of research, there's a lot of development, there's a lot of policy and regulation and governance that's still needed. But this is the time to jump in. And one way to think about this is you are living at an absolutely pivotal time in history. This is like the most exciting thing that's ever happened in 1,000 years, perhaps. And so it's a good time to enjoy it and become smart and learn how to use it effectively. The other thing I mentioned before, there's the digital chasm, which is actually much bigger than the digital divide, where there will be people who are very AI savvy, who are 1,000 times more productive than people who are not. And so they will end up taking a lot of things that we compete for, like jobs and other things. And there's a great quote along those lines that says, in the future, AI will not take your job, but a person who uses AI more effectively than you may take your job. So that's probably a more reasonable fear, probably even more reasonable than waiting for spinning black holes to swallow the galaxy. What's ironic about this is the advent of generative AI is a unique opportunity, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity at leveling the playing field, because there are very few people on the entire face of the planet who have more than 6 to 12 months of experience with this stuff. If you want to go out with your computer science degree or your data science degree and you want to compete for a web developer job, there are people out there who've been doing that for decades. So you're probably going to have to start at the bottom. If you become an expert at prompt engineering and generative AI, there's no competition. Nobody else out there has that experience. You can't say, looking for 12 years of experience with ChatGPT, because that's not possible. So I think it's a really good opportunity for people who want to embrace this, because you don't have to be a computer scientist to learn to use computation effectively. So that is the end of my discussion.